So with that, just want to welcome everyone here to the transitioning to online instruction panel discussion. Really appreciate you taking time to do this. I know everyone's really busy. Just to give you kind of a background as to how we got here. About a month ago, the panelists that we'll introduce here in a moment and we were kind of emerging from the smoke of our respective schools at the MCV and getting together to discuss what just happened over the past couple of months and what did we do, what did our schools do, what was kind of our way to move forward with this. And we realized there was a lot of similarities, a lot of opportunities that were there, and that it was a conversation that would really be valuable having with the VCU community, the MCV community. So that was kind of our purpose, is to bring everyone together today from the teaching community, discuss successes, challenges, what the strategies worked, and maybe what we can learn from moving forward. The format for today, we've centered everything around 3 general topics. This will be teaching and lecturing, assessment practices and evaluation, and then hands-on clinical experiences, lab experiences, the area. And we're going to spend about 10 to 12 minutes per topic initially. The panel members here will share just a real brief 60, 90 seconds on what they've experienced from their particular schools. And then during that time, if you want to use the chat to ask questions that the panel will discuss, that the group can discuss a bit, we will be monitoring that as well. And that will kind of wrap up for each 10 to 12 minute first round. After those rounds, we're going to open it up to a larger Q&A, and that's where we can kind of tackle more specific questions. We can look at steps moving forward. If there's some really important experiences you want to share, we can kind of switch that format. So we should have around 20 minutes, 30 minutes to work on that part of it as well. So with that, we'll move into the introductions and then get right to the topics. Probably should introduce myself from the start, but my name is Mike Forder. I am the Director of E-Learning over at the College of Health Professions. And then we'll turn it over to Catherine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Henderson. I'm a faculty development specialist in the School of Medicine here at VCU. I often consult with faculty who are facing instructional challenges and how they can use technology to solve those.
Hey everyone, my name is Brent. I am the instructional technology specialist at the School of Dentistry. So I just help where there's any interaction between curriculum and technology.
My name's Katie. I work at the School of Pharmacy in classroom support. Obviously that looks a little bit different now that we're all remote. So we've been doing a lot of different things to kind of handle that transition.
And said we while we all sort of have different titles and roles, we touch a lot of the similar items. So we've been meeting together periodically for a while before all this broke, and just kind of saw this as a good way to share sort of these collective experiences. Moving into topic 1 then, and again, if you have questions in the chat, please put those there. We've got Catherine and Katie are going to be monitoring that. We're just going to discuss teaching and lecturing online. Probably the first thing that happened when we made the shift was I got to teach tomorrow's class. Looking at the College of Health Professions and briefly, with the College of Health Professions, we have 10 different programs that approach these things differently. So I can't always say we have a uniform approach because the needs are different. But our approach, we did a variety of actions depending on the program. The program courses that were currently online or hybrid, they can kind of continue their online teaching and then transition any missing pieces online. I'd say those were our easy transitions. They knew what they were doing. Students were familiarized with it. It moved easily. Some faculty continue to come into the buildings and teach via Zoom that, would go in classroom and make those recordings. But I would say that's unlikely to continue into the summer and the fall. That was, sort of an immediate transition piece. The largest shift was from lectures to either Zoom synchronous lectures, Zoom recordings posted to Kaltura, and then some Kaltura capture for asynchronous recordings. What I think was most exciting was seeing the transition or the journey from a lot started with hosting live classes, and then started to embrace tools such as VoiceThread. Classes started to go asynchronous, but were more of an engaged nature in that modality as student feedback came in and said, the live classes at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, Thursday wasn't quite working for them in this new world. So those are some of the things we had over at Health Professions.
School of Medicine had somewhat of a similar experience. Our program is divided, at least for the undergraduate medical education piece, it's divided into preclinical and clinical cycles. The clinical cycles essentially stopped until we could figure out how students could be reintegrated into the clinical setting. The preclinical pieces relied heavily on previously recorded sessions from the year prior. We found that moving sessions to the afternoon, if they required face-to-face or if they required interactivity, was more accommodating to folks who may be on the in California, having gone home to be with their families. So making that adjustment, we also saw that happen. Now, as we're moving forward, we're really looking to re-record those, chunking them into like 10 or 15-minute videos so that one educational objective can be covered in each individual video, so that idea of chunking. And we're seeing physicians begin to identify patients that they're meeting with in a telehealth capacity so that we can start incorporating students back into the clinical piece as well.
At the School of Dentistry, we heavily rely on Echo 360. So for those that don't know, Echo 360 is a lecture capture software. We've been in that system for many years. So luckily we had a lot of our didactic lectures backed up on Echo 360. So our first thing was to kind of organize and distribute past lectures, much like School of Medicine did. Some faculty still wanted to do live teaching. So they did that either through Zoom or they used Blackboard Collaborate, which is kind of the built-in Zoom that's like embedded in Blackboard. Some of them also used Echo 360's live stream feature. And again, like medicine, faculty just came in just for that period of time for their class and recorded and live streamed from the classroom. Obviously, like the trade-off for a lot of these systems is that some systems allow interactivity, but aren't easily uploaded to like Blackboard or any LMS, and some are easily integrated into the LMS, but don't allow for interactivity. So we've just kind of had to balance those pros and cons and do what the faculty kind of want to do. Going forward in the fall, we are going to go ahead and record our lectures, mostly as a backup, just because we just want to be prepared. So if there's any reason that we cannot have live lectures, then we have recordings ready to go.
And at the School of Pharmacy, we relied really heavily on using Zoom. So we created an all synchronous, kind of like an online conference type schedule with unique links for each class, kind of coordinating with, okay, this is the room that you were in, making sure there weren't any overlaps. So there was a central schedule available for faculty and students. And we are used to using Zoom quite a lot, especially in our third year, for our third year students, because we have satellite campuses in Charlottesville and Northern Virginia. So I think our third year faculty had a little bit of exposure to this, though in general, it was all very new. So we also really relied on distributing those pre-recorded lectures or having access to them in case someone didn't feel comfortable coming in or wasn't no longer able to lecture. For us, compared to some of the other schools, I believe that I was kind of in an advantageous position because I think it's easier to centralize compared to especially College of Health Professions. And we do have cohorts of students in a lockstep program. So it was a little bit easier to centralize some of those approaches. And it does look like we have one question in the chat. So has anyone polled the students during this period to see what concerns they have, for example, internet access or computer issues? Yeah, I'm glad to see there are some other School of Pharmacy faces that are even more well-versed in this than I am. And I saw Laura put a note in the chat, and School of Pharmacy did distribute a learning survey to kind of check in with students and see how comfortable they were feeling with the whole experience. So I think we're still in the process of collecting that information. My cat stepped on my keyboard.
We We did do a survey. I was actually going to touch base on that in our next topic because there was most interesting parts were probably around assessment and evaluation practices that came out of that. But the survey data, I think, was almost a little bit behind in terms of lecture and recording because a lot of the faculty had already established a method that worked based on their students' responsiveness at that point. So there wasn't a lot of feedback one way or the other on the lecture process.
I found I guess it was faculty letters that were sent out as responses to some of the student challenges. They were shared by Dr. Rao through the COVID emails that we've been receiving. And some of the suggestions in those that responded to student concerns that were expressed were also interesting.
Are there any other questions, or do we want to move on to the second topic?
I do want to encourage all the participants to share their thoughts in the chat. Making connections with each other is one of the reasons why we're all here. So thank you, Dr. Anderson, for sharing what you all did with polling your MPH and PhD students as well.
Excellent. I think we'll have a lot more of that towards the end. We'll kind of keep on the schedule then with topic 2. And again, as we process these, think about what we can discuss further on. This would just be assessment and evaluating student understanding and kind of separating those two from each other. Assessments, our assessments were built or around exams were tackled in several ways based on the program. We have a couple programs that use ExamSoft, and so they continue to use ExamSoft's browser control. They didn't use any of the monitor services for ExamSoft because it's an additional cost. We had some uses of the Respondus monitor, as well as utilizing Zoom as a pseudo proctor. But and this is kind of goes where that student feedback is there was an interest from students to have the proctoring services. And after we rolled those out, they ultimately ran into more concerns from students against sort of this strict proctoring software, privacy issues, and really the focus started to shift towards modifying tests and approaches to testing sort of to reduce the chances of cheating and just work within those environments. In terms of evaluation, though, we had some circumstances where the students needed their final project was more of an in-person evaluation, performance evaluation. These were conducted individually via scheduled Zoom calls. There was definitely coordination. Sometimes they had a pre-assessment or pre-task to do, and that's something I helped coordinate with, and we had others work with this as well. They were generally really successful. I was actually surprised how smooth the schedule was kicked off, but they did require additional support beyond the instructor. It wasn't usually tenable to have one person running the assessments and evaluations, but also coordinating people jumping in and out of calls, troubleshooting, et cetera. So typically 2 or 3 people were available behind the scenes for those kind of big event days.
School of Medicine kind of had a similar approach. We have a homegrown learning management system and a great team that supports that. But with the challenges of the COVID pandemic, we moved to Blackboard and used the Respondus monitoring system as well for our exams. As we're moving forward, at least that's in the preclinical piece. As we're moving forward, though, we are really trying to incorporate peer assessment as a way of assessing attainment of knowledge and understanding. The struggle with that is attempting to make sure that we have good exemplars that students can use as examples. So the way we're approaching it, at least for the example that I have in mind, is having students post their presentations via Kaltura, and then having other students watch their presentation and respond to it. So that's kind of how we're looking at one way to approach assessment and of student understanding in the coming months.
At the School of Dentistry, we primarily use ExamSoft. And when all of this stuff kind of went down, we decided to go ahead and just put all of our courses in ExamSoft and run all of our exams through there. If there were courses that were on Blackboard, we let their quizzes, assessments, exams just stay in there because those are already online. But after Other than that, we imported everybody into ExamSoft, and we toyed around with remote proctoring, like our other two panelists already said, but it's just expensive and difficult and time consuming to integrate, especially under pressure. So, and there's like all the training involved that would have to go along with it as well. So we decided to make our exams open book, open notes, and I think it went well. Students seemed to be fine with it. They were very understanding about the process and the transition. That being said, then we didn't have to worry about monitoring, of course, then. So ExamSoft allows for open software, so it's not locked down, and they can tab between other programs to look at their notes and reference notes and stuff like that. We were sure not to give them like a ton of extra time. We didn't want to say that it's open book and open notes and you have 6 hours to do it. We stuck with the original time slot that the exam duration. So students, they were still under the pressure sort of a regular exam, because if you don't know the material for this stuff, you're not going to be able to look up every answer. So we were kind of relying on that as well. Again, students seem to be fine. Then, of course, that calls into like internet issues. So some students just have spotty internet, and that's, it's hard to get past that. Some students are in different time zones, and, if an exam opens at a certain time here, it's an earlier time on the West Coast. So is there a way to solve all of these issues? I don't think so, but we tried our best. Yeah.
I would just jump in on that, Brent, too. When you mentioned the internet issues, one thing that really was hammered home was that, if you're using the settings on exams so that if they exit it, it automatically submits, any sort of internet disruption would submit these exams. So you ultimately ended up doing more troubleshooting and giving them second attempts and working through things more than maybe the intention of it, just to kind of lock down things.
Yeah. As far as that, like, I really love ExamSoft. It stores the exam locally on the students in an individual device, which is super nice, so that if they have internet issues, it's not a big deal. They usually just emailed me and said, "Hey, Brent, my Wi-Fi's out. Can you open up the upload window?" And that's all I have to do, and it sits on their local device until they have connection.
Yeah, that wasn't the case with Blackboard.
No, yeah, Blackboard definitely there's a force submit option on Blackboard that I would recommend hardly ever using, because if there's even a hiccup in internet, it automatically submits, and then you have to go in there and give them another attempt. There's a question I'm going to address. Does your exam software maintain exam integrity as far as copying? So the ExamSoft has a feature to turn off or turn on copy and paste. And for all of our exams by default, I turn that off. So students cannot copy paste out of an exam. But because we went open book, theoretically, there's nothing stopping them from using their phones or something like that, of course. But that's just one of the risks we had to take, given the time. But other than that, there's no other way to like directly copy out questions from ExamSoft. It only lets you input answers, and that's it. Go for it, Katie.
So yeah, School of Pharmacy also uses ExamSoft for our exams, and we're lucky in that we have a team that also supports ExamSoft specifically and works to coordinate those exams. And we had a lot of these kind of discussions between faculty, thinking about also taking student concerns about privacy and being monitored in that way into account, and kind of developed a running document about our instructions. So like, have your camera here or your secondary device, so we can see a certain view of your laptop and the way that you're sitting. So we have some way to kind of monitor to make sure that things are fair for everyone who's taking the exam. That did require the use of 2 devices though, which when we talk about using a lot of bandwidth and using multiple devices, that can be challenging for some students. Luckily, the vast majority of our students were able to complete exams that way. I think we only had maybe 1 or 2 students that didn't have access to a secondary device for proctoring. I don't know that it's the ideal way, but it's what we try to do to maintain some sort of integrity, and students seem to give us some feedback that they were okay with the process once we kind of talked through what we were thinking. We also have IRATs and TRATs at the School of Pharmacy, which are like timed individual and team assessments. And that was also a learning process for everyone, as we like released those assessments, or from the assessments that I was a part of or was kind of helping proctor, through like Blackboard quizzes. And there's also kind of distributing like a team document for them to work on. So there were kind of a lot of components that were competing with each other that made that a little stressful under time constraints. But we also did use Zoom to break up students into groups for those TRATs, and kind of adjusted the timing constraints on those assessments according to what faculty were observing and how long it was taking students to complete the assessments, and getting some feedback from students too.
There was a question I saw there in the chat related to sort of the transition to Canvas and what these things might mean, and not that we're going to take this conversation down that road too far, but something I wanted to mention. I do know that there are some work groups, task forces, currently exploring both proctoring tools and plagiarism detection tools that would be integrated into Canvas, so third-party tools, and which ones would sort of be adopted. So that's not something that is currently in place, should you already be in Canvas, but things that are already being addressed at the university level, and hopefully might provide some clarity on these matters. Were there any other questions we missed there in the chat? Okay.
I think there was one question about the kinds of time limits for tests and quizzes. So students often requested to allow 48 hours or more, but we found there was evidence of cheating.
Yeah, I know that those extended time ones were a bit of a challenge too, logistically, to set up, and what that offered, especially if it was self-directed, meaning the test opened up when someone started it versus it all started for everyone at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. So there was some reframing of what that might mean. And I think that's a good lesson to learn from this. It was, sometimes the current practices we had just created complexities that, cause unintentional consequences. And that might've been one of them as well, is how those timings started.
One consideration that we kind of ran into or started to think about in terms of proctoring exams or how students can take exams is that a lot of our students tend to live together. So that was something that kind of pushed us towards the monitoring, or while we were proctoring using Zoom. But there are a lot of complexities that go into the way that we traditionally do these assessments that then don't transfer effortlessly to this environment, obviously.
I had never thought about the living situation, but yeah, I guess cohorts are gonna drive that, huh?
It is interesting as we've each school has taken a different approach to how to maintain integrity and rigor while trying to account for the different situations of each of our students, whether it's the living situations, lack of internet, being in a different time zone, and that self-directed faculty development that I've seen from all of our faculty and from all the faculty, I imagine, at VCU, where they're identifying where their gaps are and how they can either trust or how they can really put the trust in their students. And like with dentistry, when they just went ahead and make them open note, because if you have students that are going to cheat, then it makes more sense to open, what am I trying to say? It makes more sense to eliminate that possibility by making it a fair playing ground, right? And so as we move forward, thinking about how we can reimagine our assessments in a way that, again, creates that level playing field, puts the trust in our student, puts the confidence in them as professionals, and gives us an opportunity to explore a new way of assessing. I think we have a great chance, a great opportunity with all the challenges we faced and overcome these past several weeks.
For sure.
There's a question in the chat about ExamSoft, and when students submit their exams in ExamSoft, are they required to show the green confirmation page? So that is something they do normally if they are in a live room, but when we're doing remote exams, no, there's no requirement that they like screenshot the confirmation page, because as the admin on the admin side, we can see exactly when they uploaded and from what computer and what sign-on and everything. We can even see like the duration that they used for the exam. So while it's nice for in-person, it's not completely necessary. So we've not required that for these remote exams.
So to kind of keep with it, we'll move on to our third topic, and I think we can always circle back on assessment as well. There's a lot of good stuff there. We didn't even tackle sort of it's a good transition into sort of hands-on assessment and evaluation. We just wanted to talk this third topic about lab practices, simulation, hands-on learning, all the complicated things that were probably the hardest to bring over, and most people would agree there. It was definitely our greatest challenge over at the College of Health Professions. We tried all sorts of approaches. For labs, it was a combination of either eliminating the labs, replacing the labs with videos or other outside resources, or deferring the labs to another semester and kind of kicking the problem down the line a little bit until we had a better chance to evaluate that. And having a lot of lockstep programs and cohorts, actually, we had that sort of advantage because you know you're going to have those students in another semester. In other cases, and especially when students were at the end of the line, we had cases where students were brought in individually to complete labs, so one student at a time, and kind of do all of the distancing and practices we could. Some of these labs had already begun prior to us working from home, so that we had to kind of complete that. And I think sort of the key moving forward is just to look at every activity we have to do and say, can it reasonably be replicated online? And we're kind of going through that evaluation process now. If it can be, it should be. And if it can't be, then we're going to work on in-person, strategies for that. But there are some, and even if you can eliminate 10%, that probably it serves a pretty good value.
Yeah, we had a similar experience because obviously things that are normally done face-to-face, especially when you have patients and you have the laying on of hands, right, with healthcare. The big innovation that we saw was our anatomy practical. The anatomy team essentially filmed different parts of the body. It obviously wasn't as warm and face-to-face, and these were models that they were filming, and essentially gave a 15-second clip of what the students were intended to identify as far as the anatomical piece of this particular patient. And that they created a video exam that allowed for at least a little bit of interaction. I know that Anatomy TV is another great way of enabling a 3D modeling of what you might see in the clinic or in in a patient encounter, but our folks took it to like a video exam type practical. What we're looking at in School of Medicine going forward is virtual reality. Obviously, that's going to be a hot topic before COVID, but now we're facing the real need to kind of delve into that and see what we can do to expedite developing experts in that field and developing content around which the students can interact.
And I think that you mentioned the videos that they made for that assessment, that this is a great opportunity for us to think about what can we do with that next, now that you've created that object. Even if next time this course is taught, it's taught in person, can that be used for student review? Can that be used in a different way? It's already been made, the effort's been put in place. So what are these things that we've scrambled to create that now have other applications or uses?
Exactly. And that's where that comes back to this approach of the diligence and grace that I have seen from the faculty that have been I've interacted with over these past several weeks has just been phenomenal. And the work that has been put in, and now, like Mike said, it's the chance to make that work serve us a second time with publication. There are tons of resources on MedEd Portal or the iCollaborative across all fields of healthcare. MedEd Portal being the more peer-reviewed version, and the iCollaborative being not peer reviewed, but certainly available for commandeering, so to speak, and making it serve the purpose that we need. So Brent, on to you.
Keeping in mind that dentistry has a clinic going on, we basically had to shut down. And so we had to close most of our clinical experience and just cancel it for a while. The deans have been doing a great job at trying to, developing a schedule that's been in practice now throughout the summer, where students can go in at like allotted times and make up their clinical experience. So prior to like a week or two ago when that came out, they just had to, we used the extra time to finish didactic courses and get those done. And now they're catching up on their clinical experience. For a few situations, IT's kind of had to adopt a video production team mindset. So for all the videos from like how to use hand pieces to wet lab videos and dissection videos, we've had to just record it. It's not nearly as good as being in person and getting to see and touch, but it's the next best thing probably. So we've done a lot of video processing and just making videos. And as Mike and Catherine said, this isn't a bad thing. It's great because going forward, we have these videos now forever that we can throw out there whenever we need them.
And yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo some earlier sentiments about this team-based learning. All of these hands-on activities are so challenging to think about in this environment, and in some cases they're just not possible, kind of in the situation that Brent had mentioned. And I found myself as part of our technology team at the School of Pharmacy, being in groups and collaborating with people that I'd never worked with before, because there was so much information that we all needed to share now that we're in this environment. And that's been a really productive kind of conversation that's been really helpful. At the School of Pharmacy, we did use Zoom's breakout rooms function quite often for lab exercises, for meetings where students are breaking off into groups with their mentors. And we had a fair amount of success with that. That did take a lot of collaboration between the technology team and our faculty. Our faculty have been really awesome about adapting to using totally new features in Zoom. And that was a really collaborative effort. We also use like Google Hangouts because we're trying to think of alternatives. Like Zoom is a great tool. I am Zoom's #1 fan, but there are some things that other tools can do better. So we were also using Google Apps, trying to think of things that students already had access to make it easier for them to collaborate. And labs were held on a less frequent basis, so some sections were combined to my knowledge. There were also some kind of exciting creative things that came out of this that I don't know that necessarily would have otherwise. One of them being an activity that I think was highlighted in a VCU newsletter publication at some point. Faculty, or Leanne Hilton Gravitt, came up with an activity where all the students had group activities where they were creating like rap battles or like historical dramas about different pandemics. And that ended up being really cool, and we got to watch that over Zoom. And we've also captured these things using Zoom recording kind of as examples for the future. And we are thinking about ways, we have years of content on Echo 360 that we can really utilize and think about utilizing more fully now. I can't speak to this portion as much, but our Office of Experiential Education has been doing a lot of work kind of constantly figuring out what our students can do in the field and placements when hospitals aren't accepting students at certain periods of time. I know there was a telerotation option adopted at one point, but Rucha Bond would probably be a better contact for that than me.
Well, and this is great, like as we talk about the students collaborating and as Dr. Ishak mentioned with faculty reaching out to their peer learning network. I wanted to mention the idea really of the peer learning network or the personal learning network, and having faculty and the people that support faculty think about what drives their learning, what connections do they have, whether it's a person, a a personal connection, or maybe an electronic resource like LinkedIn Learning that both VCU and VCU Health provides for faculty and students and employees. thinking about what your inputs are for what you learn and who you can reach out to, now is the time. Definitely having those conversations, like Mike said and like Brent said, they're starting here at VCU, but it doesn't have to be contained here. It can go out to UVA, across Virginia, to your colleagues in national organizations, and networking to make innovation succeed.
That was something I observed happen in a few classes as well, that, those who had guest speakers in the past, and were kind of always bound by the idea of the guest speakers physically present, realized that they didn't have to be physically present. And I had some conversations where they said, well, this is so much more convenient for that guest speaker to present when it's available to them, and then have students view it offline or view it at other times. And it said, those are things we could always do. And then that kind of spurred the conversation of, well, if I can do that, I can pull from my entire network, people across the country at different time zones, and really get different voices in there. So this is spurring some of those, ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, imagine if that guest speaker, instead of being a lecture, one person talking to many, it becomes a chat, like a chat on Twitter, and you use a hashtag to gather that information together, and the students are interacting with each other and with multiple experts. The possibilities really abound in this time. And so I'm glad to see so many people taking advantage of it.
Excellent. I think we've got all the questions so far in the Zoom chat. And those are our three major topics, which we're pacing pretty well with time. We really wanted to open this up and kind of switch it over. So this is sort of we want everyone to kind of jump in. If there's either, you can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand, or just open your mic and want to ask questions, either share a great experience that you've had that everyone might benefit from, or ask a question that everyone can kind of discuss. But we're going to open it up.
I will say there was one question about guidance for writing open-ended questions that could be used on a take-home exam or an open notes exam. And I think that peer learning network that we talked about, that's a great question to send out into the webosphere, or however you want to refer to it, and connect with other faculty who are doing that. So as people are typing additional questions that they may have, something to think about.
Yeah, because if you think about that, if you're converting your test and your test was, say, 50 multiple choice questions, and you're reducing that down to 5 to 10 short response questions, you want those to be high quality. But those are something that you can have vetted by a colleague anywhere across the university, just to review the questions, and then from their perspective, are there flaws, are there holes in these questions, are they going to assess what you wanted to? They may not want to do that for your 50 multiple choice questions, but it might be a little easier to review 5 questions.
Exactly. And then on top of that, to build on it, tying those to your objectives, right? Your course is geared to make a professional that can behave and operate in the work environment. What does that look like? And how do those questions and objectives link back to each other?
Yeah, I want to tag on there. Just so we all have to remember, there are other types of questions other than multiple choice questions. I think obviously we've gotten a little addicted to that because it's easy. And I understand, under normal circumstances, it's really easy to grade and quick to grade multiple choice questions. But we have fill in the blanks. We have essay responses. And as Mike was mentioning, you could just have fewer questions, but have them be essay questions. And yeah, it takes time to read essay questions. But we got to start thinking a little bit outside the norm if we're gonna try to address this, at home remote testing situation that Dr. Janus was asking about.
I know one thing I was working with a faculty member on, kind of as a middle ground between the two, was sort of a formative multiple choice test where they had a performance threshold. So they had to get, let's say, 85% of the questions right in order to actually open up the actual assessment, which was a short response question. So it was kind of, here's your didactic knowledge. If you can't show that 80% of these basic questions, you don't qualify to take the test. And that was kind of covering both areas, that you have to have that baseline knowledge before you can discuss anything with reasonable intelligence.
And that's another great way to reconfigure our exams in a way that may be more adaptable to the times. Another option is to have a longitudinal project that they work on, and that is their culminating exam, so to speak. And it's intended to demonstrate their knowledge and their growth possibly during the course of your year. We do have a question that's come up from Dr. Bigby. How do folks handle exam grading with multiple instructors? Again, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you if you want to chime in about what you've done in your course. I can speak to, in medicine, we have a course on developing a humanistic physician that talks, they have multiple instructors and they have open-ended questions, and essentially what they do for their exams is a divide and conquer approach. One professor will take one question and they'll grade all of that question for the exam. The question 2 goes to professor 2, question 3 goes to professor 3, and so on down the line. So it distributes the workload, but hopefully giving the same quality of assessment to each of the students, and feedback as well, because obviously exams are also intended to be growing opportunities for the students.
And I've seen a different version of sort of the divide method, where if there are two faculty members for a particular course, on a given test, one person kind of says, this is the test I'm going to grade. And then, but before the grades and before the feedback is submitted to the students, the other person does just a quick read through and just gives it, so it may be an 80-20% effort. Just, hey, I agree with this, or, can you look at these few questions that maybe are of a challenge? And then they kind of jump in and do that. Then they switch roles on the, subsequent test.
And at the School of Pharmacy, we do have a lot of courses that are co-coordinated by multiple faculty members, and we also have a lot of guest expert speakers on particular topics. And I can't speak specifically to how they handle that, but my understanding, and please correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, is that the experts kind of create these questions and provide a certain number of questions on their topic, and then that's part of an assessment that students take on a later date. So I think that's kind of a shared kind of task.
And I will say that as we look at this different environment that we're in, that may be something that we need to reconsider. That method with the course coordinator, their role changes a little bit more, because those guest presenters and instructors, they may not be able to even make it to these sessions, or they may not be able to coordinate the same way. So what's asked of them may shift more from serving as an instructor for that day to just serving as a subject matter expert and maybe providing context or feedback or those sort of things. And then there might be more onus on the course coordinator to develop the assessment portions of it, if that sort of schedule is going to be less reliable.
Yeah, at dentistry, ExamSoft will automatically grade most of it, and then after the exam, I kick out like a summary report to the professor. And then what Mike was talking about, the course director takes the role from there. They contact the other professors and say, hey, this question came into debate. What do you think? Does the answer need adjusted? And then they just email me back and tell me how to adjust it. The other thing to think about is, Mike, I think you were just talking about this, is like we have Zoom now. So when you want to do a review session after an exam to maybe explain questions better, like you don't have to all get in the same room now. It's great. So one thing we're going to try to do this fall is, while most lectures, if need be, are recorded, we're still hoping faculty will pretty regularly host some kind of Zoom session, like a Q&A, most likely like after an exam or something like that. But with Zoom, like it doesn't matter where you are, we can all get together and discuss it more easily.
That brings up something I kind of wanted to ask everyone too, is sort of the idea of like Zoom office hours. Who's been doing that? If they had success with it? I've heard mixed results in terms of people participating, but this idea of just making yourself available at certain hours, has there been an uptick in that, and what's been the response? Well, if you haven't done it, it's a good thing to try. Oh, so yeah, Dr. Morgan just mentioned the Google Calendar signups. I know that's something we've had a few people doing as well. To kind of have those assigned times. And I think that I know we've had a few faculty members too who have gone sort of a hybrid of they'll have a synchronous class session, but are also offering it recorded for those people who can't attend, or make sessions optional, be more accommodating to schedules. But then you just kind of got to keep up on making sure the students are making effort in one of those areas.
I have a separate question to pose to the crowd, so to speak. What have you done to address the well-being of your students? What ideas have you seen employed, or have you tried to deploy yourself as far as maintaining a sense of a social presence and connection with them? Or have you seen them use to stay connected to each other? This stems obviously from open office hours and this idea of having time that we can look people in the camera, so to speak, and see other faces. Just curious what people have tried or seen done. Yeah, we have Dr. Harrell talking about using social media, Twitter, or having class reps be kind of representative of students. I know the CTLE on the Monroe Park campus has a faculty face group to kind of provide for a social connection in a sense. So that's another option. We've seen group chats every so often. Zoom office.
We noticed an uptick in just, recording sort of informal videos that were going into Blackboard, just to, how are you doing this week, a check-in sort of thing, and something through Kaltura, but real low key, just to say that they're there and they're listening.
It's something that started to happen in our pharmacy classes because everyone was getting because we're on Zoom all the time. So Nicole, Dr. Omasini just mentioned that our class representatives made Zoom themes every week. So our students would pop into class with their profile pictures as like their baby picture and things like that, which is kind of fun.
Idea. We've got a question in there about sort of exam security with the exam databases for remote use. I guess that would be specific to some of the exam software. Is that what we're getting with there? I don't know if the remote use would really change that factor. If you're using an exam proctoring software, there is certainly they lock down the abilities to screen capture and do those things, from there. But if we're not using any proctoring tools, you do have to make that assumption that anything could be copied or replicated. And I know that there are some ways to kind of mix that up, whether it's having sort of those what they call them, question banks, where it just selects 1 out of 4 questions each time. Or, the idea of just making small modifications to questions if it's a dosing question, or if it's something else where you can make just a big enough adjustment to it that it's a different question, but it doesn't necessarily change the, a lot of effort to do it. And then ultimately, accepting the fact that these are there, and maybe looking at those open response questions.
Yeah, just to add on a little bit, Mike summed it up really well. Just one thing to keep in mind: this exam software scrambles. You can set it to scramble the exam. So a student can't copy down like number 1 is always answer C, because you can scramble the questions plus the answers themselves. I think with that amount of randomization and keeping them restricted to like the original timeline, not giving them extra time to look up notes and tab out to other programs or Google answers, I think it still stays pretty secure. And I mean, after the fact anyways, like I think most faculty should be cycling their questions, at least a small percentage of them every year anyways. So that would probably help that too.
There was a question also shared earlier that I just wanted to return to before the end of the session about different schools having different preferences for recorded lectures. I think it ties in with this question here about do folks feel like their schools are moving to do this permanently or just in the short/long term? And I think that's a question we're starting to think about a lot at the School of Pharmacy because we have, again, those guest lecturers that come through our classes, and I think there are some opportunities there. But thinking about this infrastructure going forward, I don't know if faculty have been having these conversations themselves about kind of the use of recordings, or if is there's like a consistent way that they're being used in your programs.
I know in medicine we're attempting to be as flexible and adaptable as we can. It's not knowing what will happen 3 months from now certainly is challenging. And while we anticipate being face to face, at least in some capacity, building things in a way that will be adaptable to whatever comes about is how we're approaching it.
I'm going to blank on the term here, but it was actually before all this broke out. I was attending a conference, and there was a session on sort of a highly flexible attendance model to classes, where the class took place in person, but people had three options. They could attend in person, they could attend online synchronous, they could attend online asynchronous. And it was built that way with that intentionality where all students really had to do was say, here's how I plan to attend, but they could always switch if need be. And I've actually heard a few faculty now kind of circling back to that idea and thinking that that might be what we do moving forward with certain classes, is offer this highly flexible methodology that not only because of the situation we're in, but it fits people's life and work styles a little bit better. And we've learned to develop these resources we already have and maybe make that adaptation. So doing that highly flexible model, should it come to we got to move again, everyone's ready for it.
Mike, was that the hybrid flexible, the high flex model that we've been hearing a lot about?
That's the term. Yes, I'm always bad with these.
No, me too. It seems like that would take a good bit of planning up front, but it seems like that would be probably the best way to incorporate both the work-life balance for both the faculty and for the student. Go ahead, Katie.
And I was just seeing Dr. Frankert was posting in the chat about other efforts at the School of Pharmacy to kind of collect that student perspective. And our office of Laura's office put together a survey to kind of ask students, do you feel as though this class should be online, hybrid, and see what their perspectives are? I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, to balance kind of the burden on faculty and students, because we're all going to have to be in this environment together. And I don't know if Dr. Frager would be open to sharing that survey, but I think it could be useful for others to see maybe how we're collecting that information.
Well,
Dr. Janice has chimed in on the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mike, about how thankful his students have been and how engaged they are on the chat. And we often find that both students and everyone, introverts, may be more likely to engage on chat versus unmuting or muting and showing video and that kind of thing. So thank you, Dr. Janice, for pointing that out.
I think we have time for one more question or one more topic. Is there anything else we wanted to address before we close out today? Okay. Looks like we kind of wrapped everything up there. If there isn't anything else, again, I from on behalf of all the panel here, really want to thank everyone for attending. We had over 65 people attend today from both campuses. A lot of different voices here, and can think about what we can do interprofessionally, and we're all faced with a lot of the similar challenges. So I can't thank everyone enough for being here and kind of being part of this conversation. Other panelists, you want to say anything else before we wrap up?
And just a major congratulations to all the faculty for all their hard work over the last several months, and just a keep at it. Hopefully with
Agreed.
balance.
Yeah, I just second that. And I think if there's anything that's like the only thing we can take away that's absolutely certain, it's that we're in uncharted territory, and like there's no super easy answer to a lot of these situations. So we'll get there though.
And we will our plans is we'll share this out, and you know, we as a group here have discussed, you know, we really want to continue this sort of interprofessional approach, and we'll have more training and resource opportunities that are going to cross school. So look for those opportunities to kind of take advantage of these, and hopefully you'll see some of each other in future sessions. So with that, thank you all, and you know, the resources will be sent out to you shortly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.